Hey everyone, welcome back to the show today. We've had a great show so far. It's been a lot of fun. If you want to listen to some of our prior segments, you didn't get a chance to listen to those, you'll find out who Joy's favorite radio show host is. Spoiler, it's the best one. Okay, for our final segment today, we are talking about how you can ensure that scholarship and financial aid dollars keep coming your way, especially in this period where I think a lot of students and families will sort of say, well, the FAFSA is submitted and my apps are in and I don't have to do anything anymore. But we would say, well, you can actually keep working on scholarship applications and keep trying to keep that money coming your way. And, coming to us to talk a little bit about how you can do that is my colleague, Lori Peltier, who's been on the show quite a few times. I won't ask your favorite host right now, but thanks for coming on the show and helping us talk through this.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. So we want to talk a little bit about what students should do for financial aid. And I think there's this sort of, maybe it's just an internal belief that I have, or maybe it's something that families actually believe, which is that you apply for aid before you go to school and that's it. Maybe you get some scholarships at the front end, maybe not. But once you have done that, your job is done and you move on to other things.
Wouldn't that be a perfect world, right?
Wouldn't it? But it sounds like there are things you have to do every year that you need to do. So what are some things that students need to do every year in order to make sure that aid keeps flowing?
So if it's financial aid based on the family's finances, they do need to fill out the FAFSA form every year. Even if the student's just taking the student loan, you do have to do the FAFSA form every year. A new one comes out every October 1st.
Okay.
There's two good points though. One is as a returning student, it's partially filled out. So a lot of the fields are already populated. Secondly, the deadline dates are pushed back. So it's not urgent. You don't have to have it done in October. You can wait until sometimes January, February, March to even do it. So every school has their own renewal deadline dates for upperclassmen.
That's great. So if we have some fans of the show that have kept listening even after their students have gotten into college, that's some great advice for you. You can go ahead and look into that in the coming months. Go ahead. Right. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, the CSS profile form is another application that students fill out for freshman year at a lot of the private schools, a lot of the more expensive selective schools. So that is not always required by upperclassmen, but sometimes some schools do require it every year. So you may have to do both the FAFSA and the profile every year. And then any other requests from the financial aid office. And those requests from the aid office will be going to the student, not the parents. So the student has to check their email.
And that's something that changes typically when you start college, is now the communication really tends to come to the student. I think, is it right that billing still does go to the parent, but that other stuff come to the student, or does everything go to the student?
Everything goes to the student. Some schools will send a letter to the parent or guardian of such and such a student, but they don't even have the parent's name half the time. So it's just going to the student.
And this is the reason that I try and teach all of my students good and proper email etiquette and remind them that even if they want to converse with me only by text message, it is important to learn how to email once you get to college. Now, what about scholarships, right? So you're talking about financial aid, which is based on these forms, the FAFSA, the CSS profile. Scholarships are often based on other factors, maybe athletics, maybe test scores. What do you do to ensure that those are renewed every year if they are eligible to be?
Right. Most of them are renewable, and that's the nice thing because, again, you can kind of count on them every year that money will be in place. But there are some caveats. There are some strings attached to those scholarships. Usually the student has to maintain full-time status, so you can't drop to part-time. Some of them will say that you have to live on campus. Some will say that you have to stay in the same major. So if you get an engineering scholarship, you can't switch to another major other than engineering. And then the big one is grade point average. So I always use the example that I had in our family when my son went to school. He had a small scholarship that had a 3.0 GPA requirement. The end of freshman year, couple weeks go by, his grades come in, he has a 2.97. So he missed renewing his scholarship by 0.03.
So close. That's so close. So is he, I hope, paid you back all of that money?
Oh,
maybe we'll get him on the show one week and ask him what happened there. Well, I mean, but that is important. I think that sometimes, when you get to college, you're sort of acclimating, especially in that first year, you're getting a feel for expectations. I think if it is important that there are some scholarship dollars connected to your performance, you can have a conversation with a faculty member and say, what do I need to do to get a certain grade in this class? look at those grading rubrics, figure out what their participation is. Those little things can actually make a difference in terms of funding. And I think that's important for students to be aware of.
Some of the more generous schools I've seen will wait until the end of sophomore year to evaluate the student's GPA. The end of freshman year is pretty tough, but or they will give you an appeal process or a probation period. So that's what they did for my son, is they gave him a probation period of a semester to bring his grades back up to the 3.0 to reinstate the scholarship.
Which he certainly did, because no. Yeah, yes. Okay. So those of you who are watching the video might have seen a signal from Lori, but we'll just go on to the next question for the radio. What about scholarships from outside resources? There are those that are affiliated with the school, but then there are some that come from private organizations. Maybe it came from a high school, maybe come from online, from a search of scholarships.com. How do those get renewed every year?
Those are a little tricky. A lot of the local scholarships that you might get through your high school are just 1 year. They're not renewable. They are only, freshman year, and that's it. But some of them are, and you really have to check with the sponsor. Who's sponsoring the scholarship and what do they require? Sometimes they'll require a transcript of your grades to make sure you're maintaining a certain GPA, or a bill from the school that you're still enrolled. They don't want to just give you the money. They want to know what school you're at. Are you still maintaining good, satisfactory academic progress? And do you still owe the money? Some of them will require a thank you letter to the donor. They want to, if it's an endowed scholarship where someone was generous enough to donate the money, they want to send that person a thank you letter from the student.
Interesting. Which is not a whole lot to do for money that's coming your way. So definitely want to tick those boxes. That's really interesting. I never considered. Now, as an upperclassman, and I've hosted segments in the past where we've talked a little bit about this, is that, because a lot of students think that scholarships really only are something they can get in their freshman year, that they will drop the ball and just say, okay, I'm in college now. It's going to cost what it's going to cost. What are some ways that upperclassmen can get more funding support for their educations?
So there are scholarships for upperclassmen, but they don't come from the admissions or the financial aid office. They come from the academic departments. So you would talk to your faculty. So for example, when my son, I'll use him as an example, was going to school, he was a business major, and one of the schools he got accepted at, he didn't get a freshman year scholarship. He didn't get offered a scholarship as a freshman. So I said, well, what does this mean for the rest of the 4 years? But I went onto their website, went into their business department section of the website, and there was a long list of scholarships for upperclassmen in the business program. So there are certain scholarships. A lot of them might require a certain GPA or a certain research project, or a certain class that they had to take, or a paper they had to write. But there is money for upperclassmen, but you really kind of have to go and look for it. Don't be shy. Ask your chair of the department or a faculty member within the department that you're familiar with. They are the resource for those.
Is it a fair assumption that most students don't know about these things, that they'll sort of miss these opportunities? I mean, I feel like this stuff sort of flies under the radar a little bit when it comes to current students.
I think this might be a blanket statement, but some students are removed from the financial aspect. Mom and dad are paying the bill.
Right.
They're just doing their job, getting their grades and learning. So they don't have that push to go and ask. Maybe I've heard of faculty members suggesting it to students, but if the faculty doesn't know which students are struggling financially or which students are really looking for the money, how are they going to know who to talk to?
Right, which is not a common conversation that students are necessarily even having with faculty members.
Right.
I think a lot of students don't necessarily want to share if they're having some difficulty, but it is a good thing to be aware of and good thing to know as family members. Have your students look into these kinds of things. Now, in addition to the college-sponsored scholarships, there are also still private scholarships that are out there. Now, it feels like the majority of these are for students entering college for the first time, but am I right in assuming that there might be some designated scholarship funds from private providers that are for upperclassmen exclusively?
Yes. So some of them may be for students of any age or just for upperclassmen. So continue to search online. There are lots of search engines out there. There's new ones coming out every day. There's one called scholarships.com, very easy to remember. It's one that I
Yeah.
use. It's a pretty good search engine, and they're all free of charge. You just set up an account and just continue to search. So as you change your major or your GPA improves, go back and search again. A lot of these will be based now on how are you performing in college and not what did you do in high school.
That's a great reminder of just what is out there and opportunities, I think, for students, even if they wouldn't have qualified for a scholarship coming out of high school, maybe they do now because they've turned over a new leaf in college, or they're finally, inspired or challenged in a way that they haven't been before. So I think it's a great set of reminders, and a reminder for all of our listeners that this is why you listen through the end of every Getting In episode, because you always get great finance tips in the last segments, and you got to be sure that you're here for those things. So Lori, I want to thank you for coming on and for inviting a friend also, behind you. There you go. So if you're watching this on our Facebook page, you'll get a chance to see who Lori invited to the conversation today. But thanks a lot for being here, Lori.
Thank you, Ian. Happy to do it.
Great. So that brings us to the end of today's show. It's been a really, really great one, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Next week, Beth Heaton is going to be hosting the show again. We're going to invite Jen Simons to talk about women's colleges. So if you're interested in women's colleges, it's a great segment to tune in for. And we'll also be answering some listener questions, which you can always submit to us at gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. That's gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. In the meantime, I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season and you get to spend it with your loved ones safely and as healthy as possible. Have a wonderful day.